Welcome to this edition of Project Save the World and Global Just Transition, discussions on climate activism. My name is John Feffer. I am the Director of Global Just Transition at the Institute for Policy Studies, a think tank in Washington, D.C. And we also record these for we also record this for Project Save the World, which is an organization that does great work. And I'm delighted that Jacob Johns can join us today. Jacob is a Hopi and Akimel Udam environmental defender who has worked tirelessly on behalf of social justice, minority rights, environmental protection. As a climate activist, he has advocated for a wide range of causes, including protecting water, opposing the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. He was with the Backbone Campaign, which many of you are probably familiar with, and he is now Executive Director of Wisdom Keepers Delegation. And he is also recently back from the COP in Brazil, a Conference of Parties, discussions around climate activism in Brazil. And I thought, first of all, welcome, Jacob, to this discussion. I thought we'd start first with just your experience at the COP. Was this the first COP you've attended?
No, so this is my sixth COP that I've attended. Yeah, this year is this year was complicated. This was the biggest the biggest delegation that we took this year. We took about 25 people into country, which was a logistical fun time. But I think the COP itself this year was it was in a city that didn't have the infrastructure to hold as many people, and there was like a lot of issues with housing. I know that we personally were price gouged when we got there, which usually happens at COP. But this year was really it was a very unique experience. I think, after we get into the COP, there's a limited number of badges, but the folks that were attending, I don't know if you saw, but 1 out of every 25 people at the COP were brought there by the fossil fuel industry. And so this brought into light, it was building off of what happened last year in Baku, where Earthwatch had pretended to be an oil lobbyist and was basically red carpeted by the Azerbaijani government to, basically continue to do trade deals underneath the guise of environmental protection. And this year we're seeing the facade being lifted to where it's blatant that there is more delegates from the fossil fuel industry infiltrating the Conference of the Parties, and there are environmental activists or civil society that are operating in that space. And the Conference of the Parties it was meant to be an interaction platform for civil society and world leaders. The idea was for civil society to be interacting with negotiating teams and negotiators so that we can influence and sway the negotiating teams from each individual country. But if you take out 1/4 of those and replace them with oil lobbyists, what are you doing to the environment? And so, being able to recognize that was really powerful. Seeing the lack of multilateralism is just once again one of the things that are detrimental to the well-being of humanity. That we have so much potential for good things to happen, and it's always sort of naysayed by people who want to exploit the environment for their own selfish purposes. And extractive, exploitive industries is what brought us to this point in the beginning. So one of the issues that I had this year was with the TFF, the Tropical Rainforests Forever thing, and it's basically just an extension of the carbon tax, and this any sort of carbon market is just a scheme to allow rich countries and corporations to continue to pollute and trade one community's health for another. And yes, there was some potentials, and they've greenwashed it to where it seems like it was going to be helping Indigenous people. But when you look at the overall scheme of it, you're still just solidifying carbon markets that utilize Indigenous wisdom and Indigenous ways of knowing as a means of greenwashing the ongoing pollution to our environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing that this was the case in Brazil. I mean, Azerbaijan, Baku, it's kind of predictable that you're going to have a lot of oil interests present there. Azerbaijan, of course, is a major oil-producing nation. But Brazil, I mean, people expected. Look, it's Lula. There's lots of civil society organizations in Brazil. It's being held on kind of the edge of the Amazon. Was this a surprise to you that there were so many oil lobbyists there, and that much of the agenda was even dominated by oil interests?
Yeah, and I think it makes the whole process a joke, and so many people spend so much time because there's no other avenue for civil society to engage, and especially if you are, a member of a nation state that doesn't actively advocate for your needs is really important. And we can speak from this as Americans at this point, that we want to see climate action. We want to see Americans do stuff. We want to see us become leaders in the climate world, but instead we're seeing the stepping away from that. And when we have we can't advocate to our own government, then what do we have? We have the world community. And so when we go to the world community and try to advocate for what's happening domestically in our own areas, and that's not even heard, then we're sort of left in these spaces where it's like, what do we do next? If everything is a lie and everything has built up around us working with the negotiating team, and the negotiating team is no longer there, how do we continue to operate? And so I think a lot of my colleagues domestically in the United States who have been focusing on the United States the United States engagement in the COP. If for those of you who don't know, the Conference of the Parties is usually dominated by the United States government, and the United States government always acts as obstructionists, as naysayers, and comes in and find ways to mingle and meander and basically prevent logical progressive policy from being enacted globally. And so, when we don't have the U.S. and we have to sort of make friends with the U.S. and negotiating teams in order to try to sway them so that they can say yes to other things, because a lot of the things that the United States says no to doesn't have any impact on us whatsoever. Domestically, as American citizens, it won't affect us in one bit. But it will have massive implications on the global south. It will have massive implications in the equatorial region, right? This is something that we have to be aware of. And as American citizens, it's important for us to really put pressure on our government to really continue to fight for what we need. We need a healthy, just, livable future. And stepping away from that, especially, stepping away from the historical obligations of the American government contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions globally, historically as the major, contributor, that we stepped away from our obligation and our moral responsibility. And regardless of how we became American citizens, whether we're immigrants, whether we were brought here, whatever we were, colonized, whatever it may be, that we still have a responsibility as members of this domestic state, that we as American citizens must own up to our own moral responsibility and put pressure on the culprits, in which is our government. And so, as Americans, we owe the rest of the world a lot of money. We owe the rest of the world a lot of reparations for what has been done to the ecosystems. And instead of admitting the faults of our own past and righting the wrongs of our history, we're stepping away from that and embracing fascism, which is a scary time.
Absolutely. Well, I want to drill down a little bit into the question of reparations. But first, the U.S. government very famously this year decided not to send at least an official delegation to COP. I mean, we had a couple of, I think, politicians there. Gavin Newsom very famously showed up to schmooze with people. But as you said, much of the time spent at COPs in the past has been dealing with a U.S. government delegation that has been obstructionist or negotiating with the U.S. delegation. This time there wasn't an official delegation. So did that open up some space for other American voices, progressive voices, to be heard, or was it a cloud hanging over the COP? The fact that everybody there knew that the Trump administration was driving, in the opposite direction as quickly as possible.
I mean, it felt like a cloud, and that's kind of the thing, that even though the Americans did not send an official delegation, they were still in the rooms creating trade deals and still, naysaying policy that would have no implications from us. And so, being able to be these puppet masters in the background is kind of it creates this angst energy. And I think that when the COP caught on fire, right? There was a fire that took place, and the whole inside caught on fire, and it was so symbolic of the fossil fuel infiltration in the Amazon, who are exploiting the destruction of the ecosystem for fossil fuel extraction. And one of the things I think that was really powerful about that was being able to see that we were finally having a COP and where civil society was able to engage. For the past 3 years previous, before we come into Brazil, we were in fascist dictatorships that didn't allow civil society to use their voice. And so this was the first year in 3 years that civil society had been putting together, which is known as the People's Summit, the People's COP is what they usually call it. But this was a big way for people who are not represented by their governments to still come to the world stage and advocate for what's happening in their territory. And this is like where we are at now, that we are not represented by our government, but we have to come and advocate for what's happening in our territory. And the idea that one nation state can save the planet is a facade that was created in order to keep us propagandized. And, the fact remains is that we have each other, and that we have to find ways to overcome governments who are failing us in protecting the future for our children. And it's a beautiful place to see civil society like actively come out. And it was like we're so used to repression in the United States when it comes to activism. And what I saw and personally witnessed was civil society taking up space, and more importantly, pushing down the walls to make sure that they were heard, that the needs and the desires of the people of the country were being heard and amplified throughout the halls of the world. And the next day after the delegation of the people took the COP, pushed down the walls and ran through, the next day on Indigenous Peoples Day, Lula announced 10 new territories of demarcation, which is basically the equivalent, as far as you can, in Brazil to a reservation. And so these lines of demarcation were basically going to be protected lands where Indigenous people are at, to prevent them from extractive, exploitative industries to come in and destroy their stuff. Now, yes, there's a lot of issues about neoliberalism happening that people are saying, well, they're just saying that to do it. So it's like, well, our government isn't even in the room. So, what are we talking about? But being able to see the power of people in civil society come into the world stage and make demands, and the next day having those demands be heard and met is very, very powerful, and it should give us all hope.
Wow, that is really interesting. And so that clearly was a highlight. I mean, to be able to see a demand kind of taken up immediately by the head of state. What other highlights in terms of your experience there, or the experience of the delegation of 25 folks you brought down there?
So we were a delegation of people from around the world. So we try to combine all of our different desires and needs from our traditions and territories and into a platform or a document that can respond appropriately to the negotiating tracks of each year. And so we've developed a policy platform that incorporates all of our domestic needs as Americans, but also incorporates the global perspective and indigeneity that is necessary for us to move forward in this one consciousness. And so when the Americans stepped back as a Wisdom Keepers delegation, it was very refreshing, because the naysayers are not in the room, the bullies are not there, and if there's nobody to hide behind, then people maybe can come together and create some logical progressive policy that would hopefully be legally binding. If the American government ever returns back to a sense of normalcy, then we would be legally bound to that. So, it was there's hope. There's always hope whenever we see destruction, and I think oppressive systems always want us to focus on the destruction and never see beyond that destruction and see the creation and what lies next. And the ability for us to operate globally is like, yes, there are oppressive systems that are destroying the planet, and yes, ecosystems are failing, and we're on track for 2.6 degrees in total global temperature rise, but we still have each other. And our cultures and civilizations and people have thrived for thousands of years. And what we want to do is make sure that people we can create a solid network of people of resilience who can share what they have traditionally, what they've been holding on to, that have been holding on to specifically for this moment in time, where humanity can reconnect and see each other as siblings.
It seemed, at least from the reporting on the COP, that this was really one of the most kind of impressive gatherings of representatives of indigenous communities from around the world, and a demonstration of power at the COP. And I'm curious how you felt about that. Did you feel that you were able to take it to another level in terms of organizing? Also, what kinds of shared experiences did you learn about at the COP that you weren't aware of before in terms of organizing in different parts of the world?
Yeah, I mean, so coming into a country where the indigenous people weren't exterminated like they were in the United States was very like refreshing, and I felt that I went I felt very very safe in the country, and people we get told it's going to be scary and all these things, and like maybe, but not really. It wasn't. It was very very. It was lovely seeing a bunch of natives running around in the streets, and so we look a little different, but we're from the north or from the south. And as a Wisdom Keepers delegation, members of us are a part of different collectives and different groups. And one of our relatives, Chief Ninawa from the Huniquin tribe in the neighboring state of Acre, was hoping to bring 100 of his tribal members to the COP to participate in the People's COP and the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, and try to get into the Blue Zone, and to advocate in these halls for their own demarcation needs for their territory. And so a Wisdom Keepers delegation was able to raise some funds and send some money down to help bring 100 of those folks to come up from the neighboring state of Acre. So it wasn't just the Huniquin, but it was also 4 other tribes, including a delegation of uncontacted people that sent emissaries out to speak to the world about what's happening in the heart of the Amazon. And so we were able to help to send them money to help bring 100 of them up, which was a lot. And then we had our sister who came from Maui that flew out and led us on a ceremonial paddle up the river. And so we paddled up the river, and we asked permission from the Huniquin and the other delegations to allow us into the territory so that we can continue to do this work and be in solidarity. And so we were able to find a place and land, and we were welcomed onto the shores by 100 of our relatives. And being able to be welcomed into the territory before we started to do this work was very, very important for us. We engage this as a spiritual work, that this is something that we have to come and do as a necessity for our obligations, for our destiny, or wherever we're headed. And this unification of the South and the North and the globe coming together in community and in solidarity, both spiritually and conceptually, but also financially, was huge for the local people. So many folks come into countries during COP and they do nothing. They do nothing but extract, complain, and make a mess. And what we want to do whenever we come into the territory is make sure that we understand that the original caretakers of the earth know that they are not alone, and that we're coming to help them, to support them, and that even though we don't get always what we want at the United Nations, that process itself is failing, and that we have to find substitute systems that really actually reinforce the value of life. And in doing this is how we will do it. And so, when you don't really think about, okay, 100 is just a number, but we had to make sure that these folks were fed because they had to go do stuff after the thing. So we brought food for 100 people for breakfast. And it wasn't until you seen 100 people line up that you really understood the impact that we were able to create for not only these people, but for all of the people back home that they are advocating for, and more importantly, the lungs of the planet that are being attacked by corporations and governments worldwide. And so being able to come there and stand in solidarity with our sisters and our brothers was huge for us. We were able to be with them and stand with them and march on the streets. We were involved. We were witnessing all of the things that took place, and more importantly, we were able to give them platforms in different spaces that they were never able to. One of our relatives who came from that delegation, we brought up for one of our speaking engagements, one of our events, and he was so thankful because his grandparents had lived to be 130, and he said 190, and they had lived to be out in the jungle and all this, but they had never had the opportunity to speak to the world. And it wasn't until we were able to bring him up that he was able to speak for his great-grandparents who had wanted this for him his entire life. And being able to feel those and experience that in community was beyond powerful. And, it really helps us to understand that there is a chance for us to succeed, and that we will be able to survive no matter what the universe throws at us, or more importantly, what the corporations and governments will throw at us, is what I should say.
Right. Well, that is exciting, and I can see that that is incredibly energizing too. I mean, especially at a time like this when so many people are doom scrolling and just, seeing the worst of what's happening, not only here in the United States, but around the world. But to have an opportunity to come together and acts of solidarity that are just really energizing. We are, of course, now heading towards another COP. I mean, they happen every year. And I'm curious, coming out of this last one in Brazil, were there specific programs that you and your colleagues decided you were going to focus on between now and the next COP? And I guess I would begin by asking about, on the question of land, for instance. You mentioned that Lula made this kind of dramatic declaration of 10, I guess, 10 new demarcations. And here in the United States, there have been, especially over the last year, some really important cases of land back in California and different parts of the country. And I'm curious if you see that there's momentum around that, and whether it's possible to build on that momentum globally.
Yeah, I mean, I think the land back stuff that's happening in the United States has mixed feelings amongst indigenous communities. A lot of tribal governments don't feel that they have the infrastructure to accept large tracts of land. Mm-hmm. So I can speak for my own territory. I'm not from Spokane. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. My people are Akimarantham and Hopi. We're from Phoenix. We're in Arizona. I lived up here. I've been here for about 10 years. And the Spokane tribe, they're local folks, and they were offered it was like 3,000 acres on river land that this person was trying to give back that they had inherited, but the infrastructure was not in place for them to be able to accept this massive tract of land, because then they would have to manage it, they would have to do all these things, they don't have the money to hire people to patrol, all these different things that happened, and they had to actually turn down the land and say, no, we can't actually accept this land because of all of the implications that are associated with it. And so a lot of states and local governments, when they have land that is not developable, that they want to figure out ways to get rid of it and not be able to have to manage that or patrol it or whatever. And so then it becomes like this, let's just give it back to the Indians. And so there is this mixed feeling of and I know there's three other examples that I'm not going to go into, but it's this idea of us being able to, yes, we definitely want the land back, but it's not even land back, right? It's about the stewardship of the earth and the territories themselves. It's not about ownership. And this idea of us being able to return the ownership of land is like trying to get the air to be yours. It's like you can't breathe, you can't say this is my air, right? It's a whole thing. Yeah. But the idea of us being able to get land back in a way that is able to benefit the economies of indigenous communities is huge. And we cannot accept things that will be detrimental to the governments of indigenous communities, but it has to be a beneficial thing. So I mean, there is some stuff like I wanted to say the Salish, Kootenai Salish, the national bison range that was given back to them in, I think, 2020. But that was big for them because there's a lot of free range for the bison herds, and that's a huge deal. But the local communities were able to get this back, and it was really helpful. So there's like a win-win situation. For a couple of years ago at the COP, we were thinking of a proposal building up to it that we were going to use land back as a mitigation alternative for government, so that instead of saying when you're including in your nationally determined contribution that this is going to happen, well, you can say that this amount of carbon sequestration would happen because you've given this land back to indigenous people, and considering that indigenous people are protecting the lasting biodiversity, that this is a win-win situation. But we had a lot of blowback from the Indigenous Peoples Caucus and Indigenous peoples literally highlighting the needs for there to be financial infrastructure in place in order to receive this money back because of the governmental structures that were imposed upon Indigenous communities globally. And so, yes, and...
You make a really good point. And, the because there were cases of land that had been heavily polluted and overgrazed, and it's like that's not much of a a gift to try to just pawn off the land that has been ruined basically, or if there's a lot of taxes that have to be paid on the land. You're right. If without the financial infrastructure, land back is not is not restorative in the larger sense of the word. And to a certain extent, that applies, with climate reparations as well. I mean, there are all these mechanisms where, the reparations are paid, but they're not actually paid because it's another loan that is, basically given to a country that adds to their debt burden. So it's really not much of a payment of climate debt. It's just more debt that's added on. So I'm curious, given these challenges, how do we come up with better mechanisms for reparations? I mean, you mentioned the importance of ensuring that there's financial infrastructure available, if we're talking about land back situation. But are there other kind of principles that we should be considering?
Yeah, I mean, so if we take into context the UNFCCC, the process, the United Nations Conference of the parties, or sorry, sorry, what is that? The United Nations Conference on Climate Change. Sorry, forgive me. But if you take into consideration like climate reparations underneath the UNFCCC context, that there is a mechanism for distributing funds to people, and that's called the Green Climate Fund. But right now, currently, there are no window of funding opportunities through the Green Climate Fund for Indigenous people. So the Green Climate Fund was set up as like a pilot program for climate reparations, climate finance, where different countries would contribute to this larger pot, and then it would be distributed to people who are suffering from natural disasters and what's happening, like islands being sunken and all of this stuff. But as it stands now, that Indigenous people who have been colonized and they have no access to these international climate funds. And so one of our top demands this year was climate finance in the guise of climate reparations within the Green Climate Fund that already exists to allow Indigenous people to access that without having to go to their colonial overlords. So like, for example, we have different nations in the United States. Let's say the Spokanes, for example, instead of the Spokanes going to the United States to ask for climate adaptation money and mitigation money, they could go to the international community and say, as a sovereign nation, that we want direct access to these funds. We don't want to have to go to the United States. We don't have to go kiss Donald Trump's ass to try to get money for climate mitigation when we're literally putting our lives, and the Indigenous people are always on the brunt force of, environmental disasters. And so recognizing that Indigenous people are protecting 80% of the world's lasting biodiversity, it makes sense for us to put money into the hands of the communities that are defending the world's biodiversity. And so this was a big ask for us, is this like, how do we open up that climate fund? There's already mechanisms in place, but even small amounts, what we would consider small, like millions of dollars, would be very, very helpful and could act as pilots and demonstration sites for what could be possible next. And so as we're moving into these next COPs and we're talking about global reparations, global climates, it has to be direct access given to Indigenous people, especially if they're being at the detriment of their own government doing these things. We have to support those people that are protecting the lungs, and that's kind of it. It's like, for example, we were in Brazil, and all these Indigenous people who are trying to do all this stuff didn't have any access to it. The Huniquin, for example, they live in the forest, and their forest has been completely destroyed around them as settler colonial has come in and destroyed all of the forest. They live in front of a big river, this massive river, and the water is so polluted they can't drink it, and it's so polluted they can't even swim in it or bathe in it. And so this idea of us being able to say, okay, well, how can we help these folks? How can we get them to do it? Because they're definitely not getting the help from Brazil. They're not helping, there's nothing happening there. So if there are all these things happening, then we need to have a mechanism for folks that are in isolated spaces to receive these funds that are grant-based and not loans, as you said. So there are some loans that are available through like the World Bank and some other stuff, but The fact remains is that it creates indentured servants for countries and communities that will continue to pay interest, and the money that is given has restrictions upon it that doesn't allow them to rebuild the infrastructure to pay back the debt that they are attempting to pay back. So that's spot on for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your comment about financial infrastructure seems particularly relevant here because, in order to, whether it's loss and damage or mitigation or say a just transition, funds available for, environmentally sustainable projects, folks need to have, the infrastructure there to kind of handle, not only to deal with the Green Climate Fund, but also, just the bureaucracy, the all of that. And it seems to me that, perhaps a layer of funding could be made available for that. Call it, say, green infrastructure or something like that, that would allow communities to build up the capacity to handle an influx of funds without it distorting the community in some fashion. I don't know if that's something that people talk about in terms of that capacity building alongside the funding.
Well, I mean, it's always about like who's going to pay it, and it should be the wealthy nations that are paying it, but they're trying to pass the buck onto third world countries with this, this idea of going into third world countries and helping them develop cleanly. Right? So all these green technologies are going to third world countries, all that stuff. Well, and this is giving the illusion that there's action taking place while bigger countries continue to build up their fossil fuel stuff. I mean, since I forget what the number was, but I think it was that the rest of the world's fossil fuel the fossil fuel use has been taken down significantly over the past couple of years with the policies that were enacted at the COP. The United States, Canada, and Norway, instead of going down, have actually raised their oil production by 40%. And so this is showing you like how the facade is being danced around, where it's like, oh, it's not us, it's actually you guys. It's like this idea of a personal carbon footprint, right? Like it's actually not the corporation's fault, it's your fault for not taking the trash out, right? Like this idea that it's always somebody else's fault. But what we need to do is really put pressure on our governments to give money to it. I mean, it's the amount of money that we spend on war is ridiculous, and being able to just take 1% of that and being able to put it into a global fund that will allow to help the world is massively important. And it's sad that we're living in a fascist state where the idea of saving humanity is considered socialist, and that's like something that we got to deal with. But we also have to come to terms with reality. Like this is a direct ask and something that people can do, and we have to advocate that with the chorus of humanity. We cannot just be individual voices siloed in domestic states. That we have to be this chorus so that we can sing this beautiful song that will hopefully prevent the destruction of humanity.
Mm. I liked what you said about kind of bypassing national governments. Like you don't if the money is available at an international level in an international fund, it should be made available for communities to apply directly without having to curry favor with their particular governments. And so that's a kind of hopeful sign for internationalism. But at the same time, you mentioned that the UN has not been the most beneficial organization, has not turned its attention in any kind of serious and sustained way to, say, holding the feet of powerful countries to the fire in order to get them to ante up, for example, to put money into a reparations fund. If the UN is not doing the job, what other international options do we have? What other kind of what other international institutions or networks are you looking to as perhaps another place to advocate in?
Yeah, I think that the time for advocacy is done to the extent that we've had. I mean, if we are spending so much money to get to these cops and we're being outnumbered and out voiced by the fossil fuel industry, that the United Nations has failed us. And seeing the U.S. pull out of it and all of the things that the idea of multilateralism was a facade from the beginning, and it was a way to manipulate and control world power. But if we look at if this is all bullshit, then what do we do, right? Like, what do we do? And this is the thing: is that we cannot lean on governments who continue to fail us over and over again. We have to understand the power and the obligation that we have as human beings to find ways for us to survive. And we're looking at the science of it. 2.6 degrees is a massive shift in what we think. We're already at 1.5. And we're going to start to see these things. Right now, it should be snowing. There should be feet of snow outside. Instead, it's been raining for the past 5 days. And that's a scary situation. And, these ecosystems are going to collapse. They are going to fall. We're going to be, we're going to have some obstacles in our future, for sure. And so with that prior knowledge, it's important for us to find other people who are of a like mind that can come together and basically create a network of resilience for the coming impending climate collapse. And as a Wisdom Keepers delegation, we're going to be shifting over to focusing on adaptation and mitigation, and not within the context of the UNFCCC or the negotiating tracks of the United Nations, but as an actual practical ways for us to bring together our traditional teachings and find ways to share this knowledge, and so that we can strengthen the resilience within our own communities and provide safeguards for humanity. As we look at the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be broadening our collective of Indigenous Wisdom Keepers and having a larger scale for people to contribute to the policy platform, but also to create templates and guidelines for ways of living that will help us that incorporate this global perspective, and that these templates can actively be utilized not just in international spaces, but for local and regional and city governments. This is ways that can be adaptable even for neighborhood community associations, and trying to find ways that we can exchange this information, find ways to create templates that everybody can be in alignment would be really is where the energy is. We're also planning on creating 8 climate hubs around the planet with different communities that are basically going to be creating act as safeguards for humanity, where we'll be purchasing land or incorporating the land that has already been utilized in order to live in alignment with our policy platform. And each one of these nodes would be around the planet that would be creating a network. And we're hoping to raise funds so that we can distribute the funds to each individual hub in order to become re-granting foundations to allow communities or the people within their communities to transition over to living in alignment with the policy platform. And the hope is that we can have these little pockets that we're able to prepare, that we're able to adapt, but more importantly, right now, we need to start mitigating for what's on its way. Like, what do we need to plant right now that is going to be drought resistant? What kind of foods can we grow? Seed exchange, all of these different things that seem like they're far off, but are going to be necessary, and that have helped our culture survive for thousands of years. And this is just another blip. No matter what happens, we'll make it through, but we have to find ways to prepare for what is coming. So shifting over, our next big event is going to be this summer, where we're bringing together over 100 Wisdom Keepers from around the world to sit in ceremony for a week, where we're going to be talking about all of the issues that happen at the COP, what's happening with the globe, and more importantly, what are our prophecies and our traditions talk about in this time, and what can we extract that is actually practicable and adaptable for local governments and people who are just of this like mind looking for this information. So really shifting our focus from trying to solidify these systems that are failing us over and over and over again by creating our own systems and our own networks that we can draw on for what we truly need. And we're not wealthy, but we are going to do this because we do have a wealth of knowledge. And this wealth of knowledge is going to help safeguard humanity, and we're looking forward to at least having some resiliency as we look at these extreme weather patterns continuing to happen over and over again.
Very interesting. So when you talk about templates, that would be, as you were saying, for instance, drought-resistant crops, a template for agriculture. If you're in such and such a climate, these are the kinds of crops you might expect. And of course, we have different climates, so it would be different templates according to the agriculture. Or what other kinds of templates are you imagining?
So, I mean, we're really the way that view all of the things is that there is a direct connection between the societal upheaval and the collapse of the ecosystems, right? So, I mean, we always want to be out here and fighting for all these social justice issues, right? There's so many, it's a plethora of these social justice issues. And I used to be all, let's go this, we'll do that, we'll do that. But the truth is that none of that matters if we don't have a healthy, just, livable future. And so making sure that we can fix the climate, or at least have a livable place in the future for our children is very important. And being able to find ways for us to come together in community is important. And this is how we're hoping to really solve the societal problems by focusing on the restoration of ecosystems. So I mean, like, it's not even it's a lot of the times the balance is out of whack. You know, we have this saying in Hopi, koyansi, which means like the world is out of balance, right? And so this idea of us being able to restore the balance of ecosystems is really, really important. One of our friends, relatives, is his name is Raj Singh. He is from India, and he is known as the waterman of India. What he is personally responsible for is bringing back to life 13 rivers across India. And by studying the geometric stuff, or not the geometric, I forget what it's called, the rocks, right? By studying the rocks in the water flow.
Geologic.
Yeah, geologic. Thank you. But you know, by being able to study the water flow and what's happening, there was all these dams and all this stuff, but he was able to like free up all these things, recharge the aquifers, and bring back 13 rivers. And so like this idea of, for example, when he brought this river back, that the areas that had received drought were full of bandits and robbers and crime. It was scary to be down there because there was no other economic opportunities. And when they brought the river back, people were able to go back to their traditions and grow food and eat again, and the crime dropped significantly. And so this is a great example of like when we restore the ecosystem, restore balance to our communities, then we also see harmony within our societal problems. And it's a direct correlation and a direct link. So whether it's restoring water, returning land, reintroducing species, whether that's plant or animal, these are all things that can help restore the harmony that was originally there. And it won't be back going perfect, but we can at least make an attempt to restore these ecosystems. So by being able to create these templates of restoration, of examples of what is possible, is huge. One of our relatives in South Africa is a farmer. They're creating these farms, the teachable farms that are teaching resilience. And what they've been doing is going to mining companies that have strip mined the land. They go in and they just completely destroy, turn everything to rubble. And they're asking for this destroyed land to be returned back to them, and there's nothing left there. And so what they've been doing is taking a biochar, which is basically burnt wood, putting it on top of the rocks, and then putting smaller like mulch on top of it, and then a thin layer of topsoil. And over time, that stacking and formulation of all of these organic things are actually creating mycelium once again inside of the topsoil. So it's strengthening the topsoil. It's not immediate. It's years it happens. But they're able to take this desecrated land that is just completely rocks and rubble and turn it back into prairie land and back into something that was farmable and something that is wonderful and healing for the communities. And so being able to find ways and examples like that of how we can share this knowledge and this teachings, and more importantly, like what can be reduplicated, like what is successful. Let's not focus on destruction. Let's focus on what is possible, what's successful, and how can we reduplicate that in our own local communities.
Well, that's very exciting. But you also mentioned these climate hubs. You mentioned 8 different communities around the world. Have you identified, or is there a process of identifying where these will be?
Yeah, I mean, so we were originally thinking of 8 physical places in the country or around the world, and we do have some commitments. We have one in we were looking for one in the United States. We're going to do 2 actually. We're going to do one up here in Washington State, one in the Four Corners Southwest area. But basically, they're going to be like farms, teachable farms that people can come and learn and show. Like we're growing all this stuff. This is how we're doing it. This is how you can reduplicate it. Teaching farms that basically would act as these safeguards for humanity and basically teaching spaces for the local communities. And each one of the hubs would be connected within the network so that they're exchanging information of successes and failures globally. And so this is the idea of us being able to create these hubs. But the physical idea of it, we're going to spend the money that we were going to spend on COP on a hub, right? But like, you can't do, we need like $2 million to do something nice in the United States, which is ridiculous. And so it makes more sense for us. Like, $1 million has a lot more buying power in different countries. And so it made more sense for us, instead of being an American-focused organization that's focusing on climate, in the U.S. and making a U.S.-centric thing, that we, instead of purchasing land, gave the money back into the organization in order to bring all these people out. And the idea of us having physical places is important. We're still in the process of raising funds for that. But in the meantime, we can create templates that would be utilized by these hubs. And so each hub would be able to utilize the template, but the templates can also be distributed within our communities. Like, these are the templates for how we are going to live in harmony. These are the templates for restoration of ecosystems. These are all of these things. And so being able to find ways for us to do that, not just physically, but share the information, I think is the shift for us. And so the templates are meant for that. But in the coming years, we definitely are going to have physical spaces too. There's one in South Africa, one in India, and one in Mexico, and one in Benin. So we have 4 right now that are committed to it, but we still need the 4 others. And these 4 are already in operation. What we're doing is linking together the network, and we're going to build off of that in order to really create not only the physical places, but the templates that can be utilized and distributed online for free.
Well, I could imagine that once these templates are built out and developed and available, that you'll suddenly have a number of other communities volunteering, saying, hey, this sounds like a great idea. We have some infrastructure in place. And you might find that you'll have more than 8 hubs suddenly. You'll have hubs all over the place. That's very exciting. And I look forward to getting more information about that process over the years, because I think that really connects with a lot of the organizations that I work with around the world that are hungry for that kind of organizing. I want to end with a question about your art, because I know you're an artist and you do a lot of work, and I want to ask you how that relates to this work of around the climate, or do you see the two as completely disconnected? How does your art figure in your activism?
I mean, I love it's all demonstration art, right? It's all demo art. I think all of the art I do is I mainly focus on portrait work, but I do a lot of other things. I actually I don't make any money doing environmental work. Like nothing. I don't get paid. I've raised money to pay everybody else. So the rest of the money I have to figure out different ways to make it happen. And being paintings, I do mainly portrait work and other things like that. But the paintings I've been doing paintings in order to donate the money back into the organization. And so lately, this month I'm doing some commissions. We're doing commissions in order to fill our budget gap, to fill out the end of the year. So I'm taking on commissions to do for climate, which is, kind of a cool thing. But we really want to make sure that there is a connection between artistic expression and the climate, and making sure that also that they go in together. There's a beautiful world is a work of art. Let's talk about that, And there's also ways for us to utilize the art for goodwill. The purpose of us creating this art, or the purpose of me doing this painting, is so that we can do this work at the climate. And so it creates this energy and this synergy between the art and the work that is really palpable. You can taste it in your mouth, and you can feel it in the things, and that it comes from a place of substance. So when I think about the art that I've been doing lately, it's just I do my art shows just to raise money for doing the work. And that's basically where I'm at right now.
Wow, that's amazing, because the usual story is, I do this work in order that I can do the art, because the art doesn't generate money. But in your case, you have figured out a magic relationship between the creation of art and being able to fund some of the work you're doing on climate issues, and that's really wonderful. And I don't know about you, but I mean, obviously art can speak across borders. You don't a lot, especially visual art. You don't need words necessarily, and it's a pictorial language that can speak to people, even if you don't share the same language. So I think art, especially art connected to activism, can have that really powerful connection.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this inspiring conversation. I mean, we started out, it was kind of depressing because we talked about oil lobbyists and their influence on the COP, but you managed to bring the conversation around to a really hopeful and exciting discussion about alternatives that are very concrete and that will be coming to a community near you very soon, we all hope.